Welcome back, everyone. It is a U.S. base in a remote valley in a corner of Afghanistan. Now, many at combat outpost Keating, they feared the day when the enemy would come. They feared that they'd be outnumbered and stuck in a valley. Unfortunately, those fears were realized in 2009. Then ABC News senior White House correspondent Jake Tapper, he sought out to find answers. In that quest, it spawned a book. Earlier this month, I spoke with Tapper about the Outpost. I know everybody says this when they do it, but honestly, I got more out of reading this book and understanding some of the realities more than what you just see on TV about the war and about the people that make it up than of other books that I've read before. But talk about the genesis of it, because as I understand, it's 2009, and like the rest of us, you're watching the news and you're holding your newborn son, and you see this amazing attack on this outpost in the middle of nowhere in Afghanistan that claimed 8 American lives and more than double that in terms of soldiers seriously injured. And it raised a lot of questions for you, including a lot of whys.
That's right. I'm sitting there in the hospital recovery room. My son Jack had been born a day before, holding him. And I see out of the corner of my eye this television report about an outpost I'd never heard of, Combat Outpost Keating. 53 U.S. troops facing up to 400 Taliban. And what was even more remarkable was this outpost was at the bottom of 3 steep mountains 14 miles from the Pakistan border. So I was holding my son, hearing about 8 other sons taken from this world. And I just was struck by the moment. I wanted to know why anybody would put an outpost there. That became a mystery I needed to solve. I wanted to know what it was like to be in a firefight like that, facing such insurmountable odds. And I wanted to know who these troops are. And I started on this journey. I'd been covering the war in Afghanistan from the comfort of this spot right here, the north lawn of the White House, but I didn't really understand what our troops were doing, who these people were that volunteered to go to these far-flung corners of the world, what exactly they were trying to achieve there, and what their stories were. And 2.5, 3 years later, here I am with this book, and hopefully it will help explain to people the same way I learned about these brave fighting men and women, who we have fighting for us, and some of the stories they have that are really just incredible.
I want to talk about the soldiers in a minute, but let's talk about the goal, because it's in the Nuristan province, which I understand is in the northeastern part of Afghanistan. Talk about the goal of this, because it seemed from the outset that it was positioned in a valley with no cover. The people, as you described, that the troops, when they went to go meet some of the locals, they didn't even realize, many of them, that the war with the Soviets had even ended and that there were 5 different languages, different dialects. Talk about what the intent was and then the reality of what the soldiers found.
Nuristan province is almost like the Afghanistan of Afghanistan. It is cut off from the rest of Afghanistan by terrain, it's a separate ethnic group, and generally speaking, they are a rebellious people. I mean, that's a generalization, but they were the last ones to convert to Islam, which they did at the end of the 19th century. They were the first ones to take up arms against the Soviet Union after that country invaded, and they really didn't know much about what was going on in the world. A lot of them, when the Americans would come into their villages, thought that they were Russians. And so this was a real challenge. Also, as you note, the land was very treacherous. This is a part of the world not made for the kind of vehicles that we drive, our soldiers drive, not made for the kind of helicopter landings that were necessary. So in many ways, the land, the terrain was even more dangerous than the enemy at this point. The U.S. went into this part of the country for a number of reasons, one of which was to win over the locals, one of which was to stop the flow of weapons from insurgents from Pakistan. And they also were set up in that area, that very vulnerable position at the bottom of the mountains, because all the helicopters were in Iraq, or almost all of them. So in order for the camp to be resupplied, it had to be by the road. And these are the reasons why the camp was put in such a very dangerous place.
Jake, talk about First Lieutenant Ben Keating, of which obviously the camp was named for posthumously. He knew, and it seemed replete throughout the book, the soldiers knew, their immediate commanders knew, that this thing was not only a bad idea where it was put, but they never had the resources they needed to really have a fighting chance. And it's one of the things that's so frustrating going through this. Everybody seemed to know that there was a lot of bad ideas going on right now, and the guys didn't have what they needed, but either it never resonated up the top of the food chain for whatever reasons, but they never got the assets they needed to do the job.
That's right, and the book is not a polemic, it's a story. I just lay out what happened, how this camp was built, what they did while they were there. They did have some successes, the U.S. troops stationed there. They did have some victories when it came to winning over the locals, and then ultimately the death of the outpost. But I'm not trying to blame anybody for what happened. Obviously, the only bad guys are the ones with the guns and the mortars and the rockets who attacked the Americans that day. But there is a larger point in the book about making sure that our troops have what they need when we send them to these dangerous places. Helicopters, obviously, were a big problem. They were in short supply. Manpower was a big issue in 2006, 2007. Everyone was in the military practically was focused on Iraq, not so much on Afghanistan, even though that is where, obviously, Al-Qaeda was during the 9/11 attacks. Ben Keating was an interesting person to write about. He was the chairman of the University of New Hampshire's Young Republicans. He was very pro-military, very gung-ho, really wanted to succeed in Afghanistan and did everything he could. But privately, he had so many doubts about the war. Privately, he worried about the ability of the United States to really affect any kind of change in this part of the country, in this part of the world, in Afghanistan, where so many empires had died before. And in fact, it was very odd for a lot of the troops that right outside Combat Outpost Keating were 3 hollowed out shells of Soviet personnel carriers, remnants of the Soviet war in Afghanistan that obviously was a big failure for the USSR.
Jake, one of the voices we hear is Paul Monti, who lost his son in Afghanistan. And he was many who felt that not only was his son and other troops there shortchanged, but politics played a role. It was haunting. One of the soldiers saying when there was, under the Bush administration, an idea to extend a tour another 120 days for these guys, another 4 months to be there, to have some kind of mini surge. They knew, and they said, God help the guy whose idea it is, if a soldier comes back in a body bag as a consequence. They knew here what they were dealing with, didn't they, and about the real risks attached to it, and some of the political concerns that were driving the ground truth.
Yeah, the extension, the 4-month extension, is an interesting case because it happens in 2007. President Bush accepts the resignation of the Defense Secretary Rumsfeld after the 2006 midterms handed over the House and Senate, or handed over the House to the Democrats. Rumsfeld resigns, the Iraq War being one of the reasons that Democrats did well. So Secretary Gates comes in, and he's actually trying to help man up the mission in Afghanistan, but the only way he can do that at that time is to extend the tour of the soldiers in the country at that time. Also in Iraq, he was doing the same thing, which is, we don't really focus on that here in the States when we hear about tours being extended. It's no big deal, at least they're alive. But to these troops, it means some of them are not going to come home. It means weddings have to be postponed. It means children that they have already not met, they have to go 4 more months without meeting their children. And it's really a heartbreaking moment. Paul Monti, you mentioned, he is from Raynham, Massachusetts. His son, Jared Monti, was a specialist with 371 Cav. He was killed in an unbelievable act of heroism and gallantry. One of his soldiers is wounded in an attack, and he stands up, and knowing how dangerous it is because they are under Taliban attack, he runs right into the fire to try to save this other soldier. He does not make it out alive. He's killed. He was posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor. But the reason that Paul Monti had real concerns with what happened is because one of the reasons that Jared Monti, this hero, was discovered, it gets very complicated, but the bottom line is a mission was about to take place. Jared Monti and his team were doing an overwatch of the bad guys, trying to make sure everything was okay before the rest of the 371 Cav pushed in. somebody got wounded, not with Jared Monti's team, but with another team, because that one guy got wounded and this group was so undermanned, they had to delay operations for a day. Because they had to do that, they had to send in supplies for Jared Monti and his men. Because they had to send in supplies, the Afghans, the bad guys, found out where Jared Monti was and attacked him. So Paul Monti was very upset that because this mission was undermanned, his son died.
The one thing that struck me was a lot of them young husbands, young fathers, young guys. To a man, all 8 of them died trying to help out members of their unit in different ways. Were you struck in hearing the retelling, just the amazing amount of commitment these guys had to the fellow people in their unit?
Yeah, it's incredible. You're talking about the final battle in the book, October 3rd, 2009. These 8 men, every one of them died because he was doing his job and trying to help, either trying to help save a brother or fighting the enemy. That's it. Every single one of them died in an act of heroism. From the very first one killed, Private Kevin Thompson from Reno, Nevada, he runs out to the mortars and he's shot. He's just trying to do his job, return fire with the camp under attack. To the very last one of them, Stephen Mace, who dies because of all the bleeding from the attack. He had been trying to help some of his fellow soldiers who had been trapped in a Humvee during the attack, a Humvee that also doubled as a guard station. And so every one of these guys, I try to tell their stories so you get to know them a little bit, and you also learn about how they died, because they weren't just picked off. Each one of them was running into danger to help their fellow soldiers. And in a way, even though it is tragic, it is also inspiring that this is who we have representing us in the field of battle.
You know, Jake, I'll end where we started, which was you started this book when you were holding your newborn son. If you fast forward, and he's of military age here, and obviously it comes through the book, you got great affection and unbelievable admiration for what these guys do, but also you saw the systemic failure from those above to give them what they needed and to put them in a position to succeed. And he said, hey, Dad, you know, I want to go on the front lines in wherever the Afghanistan or Iraq might be when he's 18. What would you say?
Well, as a father, I don't want my son even walking near traffic. You know, I wouldn't want him to subject himself to anything dangerous, whether it's skydiving or water skiing or going to the front lines. Obviously, I have tremendous respect for our men and women in uniform and their families, and if my son or daughter opted to join the military, I would respect it, and I would certainly understand their feelings of wanting to give back. But as a parent, you know, I pay attention to whether the bites of the apple they're taking are too big. So I'm the last one who would be eager to have anybody marching off to battle.
Again, the book is The Outpost, and it's really one of the best books I've ever read, at least to understand war from the eyes from the guys that are there. Jake Tapper, great job. Thank you very much for a few minutes. I appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. It's been a pleasure.
And you can also watch more of my interview with Tapper on our YouTube page. We will be right back, so stay with us.